Hi there, Matt.
Hey, Bill.
Having a happy tax day, happy Tea Party day.
Yeah, I love writing those checks to the IRS. So.
This is your connection to your government. You own the government.
There's a great old song by Johnny Paycheck called "To Hell with the IRS." Nobody's ever. I bet you no one even knows that song because it's a really old country song. He's the guy who said "Take this," who sang "Take this job and shove it," and it's a great song. And he's an underrated country performer.
He knew how to sing about telling people to shove it.
Yes.
Whether it was your job, whether your boss, or your government.
And that's a song that the working man, and I've got my blue collar on right now, that's a song that the working man can be proud of, is to take this job and shove it. So,
I prefer paying my taxes to having to be ruled by a monarch and his money bags. That's just me.
Yes, if those are the options. Well, anyway, moving right on.
We were talking before. You made an interesting observation about a change in how bloggers are finding material. Change in technology actually impacting how bloggers are operating.
Yes, there's a couple of interesting stories in the last week or two that I think about this. One is this guy Tommy Christopher who blogs at AOL. He also has his own blog called The Daily Dose. And he's had a couple instances. He follows people on Twitter, and he actually really scours their tweetings for potential blog ideas. And just in the past couple of weeks, one he had Marcos Melitsis, the Daily Kos guy. Was sort of making light of this police officer who was killed in Pittsburgh. And Marcos and some other guy were kind of going back and forth on Twitter. Maybe, I think they were joking about something to do with Dick Cheney shooting somebody. And Tommy actually I guess Marcos retweeted it, and Tommy contacted him, and Marcos sort of just laughed it off. So Tommy wrote a post about it. It ended up getting picked up in, I think, Huffington Post, Red State, and Hot Air. So that was interesting. Then this past week, Tommy was looking at one of Newt Gingrich's tweets and sort of saw a disparity between the way he was talking on TV about the pirates and sort of very harsh in terms of Obama's handling of it versus he was sort of tweeting. The voice was a bit more understanding and maybe milder. So that was interesting. And then we had a story that happened just, I think, yesterday. This really, really good liberal blogger called Not Larry Sabato. I think his name's Ben Tribbett, actually.
One of the big Virginia bloggers.
Yeah, he's actually, in fact, it's probably the best Virginia politics blog. He was looking at the Virginia Republican Party YouTube page, which is interesting. And we know they've recently, I guess last week we talked about them ousting their chairman. And apparently one of the favorites saved on the Virginia Republican Party YouTube page is this video that's sort of a lesbian video, although there's no nudity. But it's, I guess, two girls kissing or something. And Not Larry Sabato wisely took a screenshot because predictably it came down. Now, I had to do research. I normally wouldn't have watched that video. But,
of course not.
But to be able to report on this, the first thing I did was turn off my YouTube thing so it couldn't be tracked. But then I did have to watch the video 2 or 3 times to be able to talk about it in an educated manner. But anyway, the larger point is that the bloggers are looking at other social networks now, like Twitter and YouTube, and probably Facebook, MySpace, different things to find blog material. And it looks like Tommy Christopher is at the forefront of this.
Well, what strikes me as interesting is it's one thing to bust Marcos for saying something politically incorrect on Twitter. I think Marcos has long said politically incorrect things. I thought conservatives liked politically incorrect things. That was always a stock in trade.
Yeah.
And to bust probably some low level Virginia Republican Party guy who stupidly tagged a saucy video as a favorite. But the swift influx of Republican office holders and party elders like Newt Gingrich onto Twitter, when they're not necessarily as adept and as thoughtful to the speed and the rhythms of new technology, to make a mistake.
By the way, Bill, I don't want to interrupt you, but
sure.
I'm sorry because this could be weird. I don't want Tommy Christopher to write something about me. If you hear, I don't know to what extent my computer picks up volume, but if you hear some really loud, weird noises, I have 2 pugs, and one of them was snoring like really super loud. Pugs do that. So I hate to. I don't mean to do that, but just in all seriousness, it was kind of weird. And if my computer picks it up, it could, God knows what people might think. So, but you were making a very good point, which I think is entirely good about people who aren't traditionally bloggers or young, maybe new media people.
Because I don't think Marcos cares,
right?
that he made this comment and that Ty Christopher blogged about it. And I think, thankfully, we've gotten to a point where people understand the blogosphere well enough. If this happened 4 years ago, every liberal blogger would have to answer, do you agree with what Marcos said? And I think we all know that bloggers speak for themselves and not for the entire lot of us.
Right.
But it's different when you're a politician and you're a part of a party. If you're Newt Gingrich and you're being talked about as a possible presidential candidate, it's much easier for that to reflect on the party as a whole. And there's been some other instances where it seems like people have said things that were in politicians, and have had to walk it back or apologize or blame it on a staffer or what have you.
Yeah.
Do you think that? I guess 2 months ago, the Republicans thought that Twitter was going to be their salvation, help them catch up to Democrats, technology speaking. Are they getting adept and competent with the medium and how to use it effectively and not have it blow up in their face?
Well, I think that there's always potential for gaffes, especially when you're operating real time. I mean, this morning, I don't know where it was on Fox or MSNBC, but somebody was talking about how Twitter is very unnatural in the sense that normally in your life you would have time to think things over before you commented on them. And if we thought blogging was sort of dangerous and walking the high wire, because we don't really have editors typically, and you just write stuff and put it up and it's out there for the World Wide Web. I mean, Twitter is just so quick, and there's such a potential to write stuff and get it out there. Remember, we had an example during the McCain campaign. Soren Dayton, who's a conservative blogger and strategist, I guess tweeted out a video of Reverend Wright, and he actually ended up being ousted from the McCain campaign because of that. So, and this is not the first time we've had it. Part of what made the Tommy Christopher story of note, I think, is also that he is a liberal blogger. And so it's always interesting when you have a liberal taking on a liberal or a conservative taking on a conservative. And so the Marcos Melitsas thing, Tommy really, I think, made a principled stand about, not making light of this police officer being shot, and not trying to. He also had written about not politicizing it, not trying to use it for political gains. So that was the other.
I think that was more. In my reading of Marcos's comments, I don't think he was trying to make light of the officer that was shot. He was trying to take a shot at conservatives, broadly,
right,
about the incident, which you can argue is an unfair broad brush, and I think and that's where I think where Tommy was going with it. That you shouldn't be taking this one incident and blowing it into a larger thing.
Right.
But I would think it's fair to say Marcos was trying to make light of the actual murder itself.
All right. Fair enough. I think you're right. And actually, I think initially Marcos just retweeted something somebody else had tweeted. So. The whole thing that started this wasn't even started by Marcos, I don't believe. I have to go back and read the chain. I tend to remember that Marcos retweeted a joke or something someone else said, but because Marcos is famous, Tommy was probably more apt to write about him than the other person. Which plays right into how I was ignored by Rush Limbaugh this week. So we can get to that.
Of the long list of Rush Limbaugh transgressions, this gets me.
Now he's gone too far.
This gets me riled up.
Now he's gone too far.
I don't like to see you disrespected.
That's right. Watch out, Rush. I will bring the entire town hall community and Politics Daily community down on you.
Well, you were speaking earlier about sort of liberal on liberal disagreements, and I think they happen certainly on tactics far more regularly than people might appreciate, and you're starting to see some of that in the conservative movement as well. Not just actually, it's specific to how should conservatives have treated Obama's role in the pirate rescue mission,
right?
And outside the blogosphere, Bernard Goldberg kind of got into it a little bit with Sean Hannity on Fox News, where Sean Hannity was trying to cast aspersions on Obama's role, and Bernard Goldberg was like, "Look, we don't have to find fault with Obama with every last thing. This was a good thing, and give the guy credit for it." So you and Jonah were on that side of things as well, correct? Jonah Goldberg.
Yeah, I mean, I actually honestly felt it was like the first, what I would call a win in a long time for America. It was an example of a clear bad guys versus clear good guys, and it showed that we actually could do stuff, that we could actually get something done. And I think that it's very good for America, very good for morale, and I think that if it had gone wrong, Obama would have gotten blamed for it. And so I think maybe that's unfair. Maybe it's unfair that he gets too much credit for it, but I think it's certainly not. It's one thing to not give him credit, but it's another thing to find a way to criticize him for this this success. So I essentially wrote that I thought what I just said. I wrote that I thought that had this gone wrong, Obama would have been blamed, and that this is it's a morale boost, and Obama will get credit, and to a large extent he deserves it. Jonah Goldberg, I think, pretty much echoed that. He didn't, he
blogged about it at the Corner.
Exactly, over at National Review at the Corner. And Rush Limbaugh on his show was critical of that, which was interesting.
What was Rush Limbaugh's argument?
Geez, I'm trying to remember precisely what his argument was. Geez, I can't quite remember, but I mean, I completely disagreed with it. Part of the reason that I think I can't remember it is probably because I don't really think it was that good of an argument. And I normally agree with Rush 99.9% of the time, which I think he says he's right, or he's correct 99.9% of the time. So maybe that 0.1% where I disagree with him, but it just struck me as trying to find a reason to be against Obama. And I think there's enough legitimate reasons to be against Obama. But, look, if we're going to be taken seriously incredibly when we say Obama is wrong or this is bad policy, then we can't just reflexively oppose him. And I cannot, it's very hard for me to imagine how anybody could make this out to be a bad thing.
Do you think there is, within the conservative blogosphere, is there a big divergence of opinion on this point, or you and Jonah isolated voices on this subject?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I probably went a little bit further than almost anybody in terms of the, not praising Obama, but in terms of the impact of the event, of the symbolic nature of it. I mean, it happened on Easter. I really feel like there's a lot in America that's been going wrong for a long time. And I'm not blaming George W. Bush for all of that, but I really have to think back to, and by the way, I don't want to sound like Michelle Obama, that this is the first time I've ever been proud of America. But I have to go back to Ronald Reagan.
It's like a malaise speech, Matt. Jeez.
I'm a little down, and the weather here is just horrible. It's depressing. No, I mean, you have to almost go back to Ronald Reagan. I can't think of anything during the Bush or Clinton administrations where America really had like a definitive kind of win. We had that incident in the first couple months of Bush's administration when we got what was it? An aircraft went down in China, and we somehow got it back. That was almost like averting a disaster, but it wasn't really a win. But this really felt like something to be proud of, and I just think that there's a lot that I disagree with Obama about. But if people are going to take me seriously, and credibly when I critique him for his failings, then I think that it can't be perceived that I'm just reflexively against everything he does. And that's probably. There are some people who look down at that as sort of, being a pansy or aiding and abetting the enemy.
Well, I think the difficult position, that would put someone in the opposition in is, on one hand, you want to be, as you said, you want to be a credible person. If you're just opposing, regardless of what the facts are, you seem knee-jerk and not a serious observer of politics.
Right.
On the flip side, if Obama is seen as a competent commander-in-chief who's willing to effectively push the button when you have to push the button, that gives him more leeway for when he doesn't want to push the button, but he wants to engage diplomatically with a country like Iran or with Syria or with Cuba. It might not engender the kind of attack you would level on him. You're a soft pansy who is going to kowtow to our enemies. That's not going to get as much traction if there's a sense like this guy knows how to weigh the pros and cons. He'll be tough when he needs to be tough. He'll be diplomatic when he needs to be diplomatic. If you let him get that reputation, it's going to make it hard to criticism down the line. So I could see why Rush and Sean are doing what they're doing.
No, there is a legitimate strategic reason that goes beyond just opposing for opposing. I just tend to disagree with it. I think that my job is to be as fair as I can be, and to call them like I see them. But Rush and Sean may see their jobs as differently, and who knows who's right. I've been wrong about stuff like this before, and in my post I even wrote that it's very possible that next week the Pirates will do something horrible as revenge, and that this will end up being seen as a bad move. But we'll have to wait and see. I just don't want to have a double standard that if a Republican does something that it's good, and if a Democrat does it, it's bad. And let me ask you, Bill, because I'm sort of sitting in the seat where you've been for the last 8 years.
I have a lot of practice.
Yeah, I mean, were there instances where you applauded something that Bush did and took heat for it potentially?
With Bush, I honestly don't think so. Bush was always this very weird situation where you would really look back and say, can I think of one thing that I could say was good out of this guy? You couldn't do it. I could do that with Reagan.
Yeah.
There are things with Reagan I'd say, I don't like this guy overall. But he did engage with Gorbachev diplomatically.
What about when Bush worked with Teddy Kennedy on education or Medicare reform?
Well, we hated those things. We were mad at Kennedy.
We've got more in common than we might know. Do you know that?
Bush and Kennedy?
No, me and you.
We hated those things for different reasons.
Me and you versus Bush and Kennedy, man. We'll take him in 2-on-2 basketball. Bad idea, jeans.
But I do think, as a general matter, you do want to have that sense of bearing. I mean, you want to operate on principle. If
right.
The conservative principle is you should be willing to use military force to achieve national interest, and that is done, you should get behind that.
Right, but I don't think that's not necessarily the principle here. I mean, to me, it was honestly, think back, or at least to history. You probably don't remember this exactly, but when we had our hostages in Iran, and America was suffering through this malaise. and the economy was horrible in the 70s, and Jimmy Carter was in, and they took our, they took our hostages in Iran, and we actually had a failed attempt to get them back, where I think a helicopter crashed, and it's just demoralizing.
Actually, a good Guest of the Ayatollah by Mark Bowden, who also wrote Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good overview of the Iran hostage crisis, and what was so tragic about that rescue attempt was that they'd already decided to abort it. They had gotten into Iran. I mean, it was this extremely complicated rescue mission. It was a real. There were no good options in that scenario. That's sort of the theme of the book, about how you really just had your hands tied. Even when people were sort of complaining at Carter, you'd ask, a guy on the street, what would you do? No one had a better answer what to do about it. You go in there guns a-blazing, then all the hostages would be dead, and at least the hostages actually did get out alive, even though it took a long time.
Yeah.
But they actually, as the last resort, finally went in there, and then when they landed on Iranian soil, one of the choppers had a malfunction, and they said, we can't do this without the full capacity. So they very despondently said, okay, we got to turn back. It was when they were turning back was when two choppers crashed into each other in the dead of night.
Right.
So it's this horrible outcome and very demoralizing for the country. But as much as I would be of the stance where I wouldn't give Obama disproportionate credit for the fact this went well.
Right.
I think Carter gets disproportionate blame for the fact that rescue mission went
I
badly.
agree. And I think it's like, when you're a coach, you get praised more than you should when you win, and more blame when you lose. But I wrote about this. I think that there's such a thing as being lucky, and that being lucky can be better than being good. And the good teams are lucky. The New York Yankees always find a way to win. They get lucky. It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, who knows how this is going to shake out. But I really, really felt like if this had gone wrong, it would have been just...
Oh, it would have dumped all over.
Yeah, and never mind the attacks that Obama would have gotten, because I don't really care. I don't like to see what happens to America if that captain, if these petty kid pirates had been able to kill our captain, and with the whole nation watching, the whole world watching, and we couldn't stop them with our destroyer. I don't know that I could stomach a lot more of that with the economy and everything else that's been going on. I really felt like this was good for the country. And maybe who knows?
And I think it probably, in an indirect way, certainly helps Obama's ability in dealing with all of these very complicated foreign policy problems. If there is a sense that America is back, and if you cross us, you're going to be, it's not going to be good for you. That's to the good.
That would be, and then we are talking about Reagan territory, but I don't think we're there yet, and and I don't think that it's going to happen. But I will say this: I'd rather, Rush's statement that I want him to fail. I agree with Rush in the sense that I'm convinced that Obama's policies cannot work. And so I want him to fail in implementing. And that's obviously what Rush was saying. It obviously got portrayed differently. But I would rather, if the choice were between, America being a stronger country and versus, my political side winning just so I win, there's no competition there. It just so happens that I believe that Obama winning and America being more prosperous are mutually exclusive.
We'll have to revisit that in 4 years or 8 years.
Yeah.
Because I think it's possible to think Obama's plans might work, but I philosophically don't like having that level of government activity. I like there being winners and losers. I like the fact that people are on their own without any government help. I don't care what the GDP number is. The philosophical point is more important to me.
No, I mean I think most free marketers would say that the two go hand in hand. That a free market and the sort of Milton Friedman, Adam Smith kind of economics actually leads to prosperity.
I'm just trying to give you an out in case this all works out.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, I will say this: it's entirely.
I don't want you to come back and say you're a liberal now after 4 years of Obama. That wouldn't be any fun.
I will say that I think it's entirely possible that it works in the short run and doesn't work in the long run, or that he gets credit in the short run, but we don't see the problems for the long run. So that's the kind of, I think, most dangerous scenario.
So when do we have to come back and revisit?
When I say so. No, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. At what point? As George Bush said, they're still writing histories of George Washington. So
right. Well, speaking of where the country goes from here, we're taping this on tax day.
Yes.
And there were a number of things on the left and right regarding where our tax code rests right now. You had Ari Fleischer in the Wall Street Journal talk about how the tax code is unfairly burdening the wealthiest. It's putting too much on them, and it's the old lucky duckies argument that the Wall Street Journal has pushed in the past, that poor folks are not paying enough taxes and then too much is being put on the wealthy. My group, Campaign for America's Future, I should say Institute for America's Future, because that's where our research stuff comes from. Eric Lotke put out a report showing how income equality has gone up while tax rates on the wealthy have gone down. You have Ezra Klein blogged about the Citizens for Tax Justice report that talked about overall tax burden when you incorporate not just federal taxes but state and local taxes. The federal tax code is, despite those tax cuts, still more progressive than state and local taxes, which, as Ezra pointed out, you have a lot of things like sales taxes, which are more inherently regressive. And so when you put them together, you don't have a very regressive situation at all. And you had Connor Clark at The Atlantic take on Ari Fleischer's op-ed directly, saying, there's a reason why the wealthy are paying more in taxes now than in 2001. It's because they made more money. In 2001, the top decile earned an average pre-tax income of $294,700. And in 2006, it was $366,400. So, of course, they're going to pay more in taxes because they made more money, even though the tax rate went down. So that doesn't necessarily speak to a disproportionate burden. And on the backdrop of all that, you had a Gallup poll saying you actually had the highest number of people in the country, 48% of plurality, saying they think what they're paying in taxes is actually okay. So I wonder if that colors conservatives have always gotten a lot of juice out of tax day, and people don't like the process of paying taxes. But if you're having more and more people actually comfortable with the amount of taxes they pay, to the extent they're upset, it's about what's happening at the top end. Does that change how conservative bloggers look at the picture?
Well, I mean, I guess one obvious thing is the tax stuff. I mean, the tax day tea parties. People seem to be kind of ticked off. So I wonder if, I mean...
Well, the question is how broad-based is that outrage? Is that something that's going across the ideological spectrum, or is this just a conservative protest?
Right. But I guess my point is that conservatives have been making hay out of taxes for a long time, but I don't know of other, I don't think that there have been this kind of outrage, this level of outrage that we have with the tea parties. And so it just makes me wonder about people being content and happy when we have this, thousands and thousands of people in all 50 states having these. I will say, though, putting that aside, Ari points out, and it's accurate, 70% of income taxes are paid by 10% of the people. I think the issue is that it's really about incentives. It's about incentivizing, and if you're a rich person, which I am clearly not, see, I've got my blue collar on. If you're a rich person, number one, I think a lot of times they do find ways to not pay taxes. The middle class and other people tend to get soaked, it seems like. But if you're gonna hire people, start a business, at some point it just doesn't. It's just not worth it. If you have to work a lot harder,
always fascinates me. I've heard that a lot. That the wealthy are ever going to pay it. It's going to fall on you. So you should oppose all these other plans that the liberals have cooked up. You never see conservatives join with liberals on something like the estate tax, which is something that solely falls on the uber wealthy. If you're actually sincerely concerned about the wealthiest wriggling out of paying their taxes, why wouldn't you join with the other side to pass tax provisions to make sure they do pay their fair share?
Well, I mean, the so-called estate tax, which we call the death tax, is just fundamentally un-American. And I mean, conservatives could not support it on principle because the premise that I'm going to work my whole life, pay taxes on the money that I earn, and then when I die, I try to hand that down to my children or my pugs.
Who did not die. Who get a lump sum.
And they have to pay taxes on it again. I already paid taxes on it. That's my money that I worked for. I paid taxes on it. It's inherent, it's private. It's private property.
This year,
it's private property that the government is essentially seizing.
This year, the way the estate tax is right now, and this is a reform that is part of Bush's tax cut, although if Bush's tax cut went all the way, it would be totally repealed. The way it is right now, on inheritance, you would pay no taxes up to $7 million for an estate that was run by a married couple. So it is not, by any stretch, taking all of this inheritance and gobbling up by the government. It's up to $7 million you pay nothing on.
But it wouldn't. I mean, it wouldn't matter to me if it was $100 million.
45%.
But it wouldn't. It wouldn't matter to me if it was if the threshold was $100 million. And keep in mind, I hope you at least realize that clearly I'm not making a self-serving argument here, because this obviously doesn't impact me. I would oppose that on principle, because
I don't understand
the person has earned that.
I mean, we all
you don't understand the principle or the principle?
We all pay tax on income. Everybody does. And whether it's an income tax or a payroll tax, we all pay something to keep our government powered. There's no type of income where we say, this type of income no one should touch in any respect. Why should inheritance be treated in some super special way where it doesn't matter how much it is, there shouldn't be any level of tax on it?
I view it as double taxation, and but anyway, I suppose we could go round and round on this one. Clearly, we disagree or differ on it. But I guess I mean, how did we even get down on this?
You were making the point that the wealthy always seem to wriggle out of paying their taxes, so the middle class always gets the short end.
Well, okay, I mean, you were referencing the Ari Fleischer op-ed.
Well, correct.
Okay, so my point is, I think he was entirely accurate when he said that 10% of the people pay 70% of the taxes, and you think that's not enough.
Well, I don't think Fleischer is looking at all of the data. Again, if you look at not just federal income taxes, but you look at federal payroll taxes too. If you look at, as the Citizens Tax Justice Report did, bring in the state and local taxes on top of that.
Yeah. Then it goes to what, about 55%, I think the blog said. It's 10% of the people pay 55% of the taxes. I'd also point out the issue of states. Rush Limbaugh, there was a mini Rush Limbaugh controversy, I guess last week or a couple weeks ago. People have the ability to leave the country and leave states. And so, particularly, Rush Limbaugh talking about leaving New York. In New York, a very small percentage of the wealthiest people pay the vast majority of the taxes in New York. And at some point, it no longer makes sense for them to stay there. It's a business decision. At some point, it's better to move to Florida or New Jersey or California or wherever. It's just not worth it. And so essentially you can have a situation where these state governments are losing the people who are actually providing the services and the funds for the vast majority of people. It's almost like when businesses leave the United States.
Yet somehow New York City is still standing. Somehow that city manages to scrape by.
For now.
I mean, obviously, when you have a situation where it's like you're going 10 feet away to clearly pay less. You're going to have a certain amount of people who are doing that. To leave the country altogether is a much bigger operation. And obviously there's some expats in the country, but it's not a devastating number. And as we all know, as any conservative will tell you, America, love it or leave it. A lot of people love America for good reason. I don't just think it's the low taxes. I think there's other qualities that America has that people tend to be very enamored with.
Well, I think I'm going to stay with it. Stick right here.
Other countries, are you checking out some places? You have some backup options in case the tax rate goes too high?
Well, most other countries are way worse than America, but I am kind of fond of Costa Rica, actually. And, Toby from The Office went there, apparently, on vacation, and I've been there. It's quite fabulous, actually.
And how's the tax rate?
I have no idea. It's probably horrible, but I could go down there and maybe be a rabble-rouser and... So, who knows? I think I had. Did I have another, or did you have one more? How are we doing?
I'm good.
Oh, the last one I had, and just to quickly mention, it's the whole DHS thing. The conservative blogosphere was abuzz this week with reports about these dangerous extremist right-wingers that we need to keep an eye on, and it's just 1990s all over again. It's Oklahoma City, vast right-wing conspiracy. And Michelle Malkin, I think, was probably the most influential in terms of getting word about this out. I guess there's a Washington Times story, but it's a little bit scary. And I think I've talked a little bit here about how libertarian conservatives are more libertarian again like the 1990s. And who knows? Maybe my blogging will be deemed dangerous, and maybe there'll be a knock at my door. And next week. I may not be sitting here next week because I may be a danger with my right-wing, pro-life, anti-abortion extremism. So,
well, two things I'd point out. One is the Plum Line, Greg Sargent, posted that there is a parallel DHS report about left-wing extremism.
Well, that's perfectly legit. By the way, today is the anniversary of the Sacco and Vanzetti thing.
two people wronged by justice. Absolutely.
So, I think they were arrested on today. Either that or executed. I think arrested.
And I don't know if you recall, you might not have seen Fahrenheit 9/11.
I have not.
There's actually a scene in that where he meets with a group of Quakers who had been harassed by the federal government for being treated as if they were engaging in subversive activities because they're a peace group. So it was more than just a report.
How dare they?
They actually got the door knock.
Right.
And I not casting any aspersions on you, Matt, but I did not see a lot of conservative outrage when that was going on.
Well, I mean, that's actually part of what I wrote about. I think we talked about it, about whichever party is out of power all of a sudden becomes concerned about civil liberties and the moral, and I think moral outrage about that, and is helping fuel the Tea Parties. So I'm happy that there wasn't any sort of massive crackdown today on the Tea Parties or anything like that. So
I mean, and that's where the rubber hits the road. It's you can twist a report around, but I mean the question is, what is the government actually acting to do? And I don't get the impression that there's going to be a blanket McCarthyite witch hunt on every conservative blogger out there. But there's definitely there are hate groups out there. There have been terrorist acts before. There was Oklahoma City. There was the Olympic bomber. If you want to prevent terrorist acts from happening, you need to have some kind of intelligence operation. You don't want to do any kind of crude profiling.
Well, I think that was the sort of most
people unfairly, but you got to have some kind of refined sense of what to look for.
But that was sort of, I think, the most offensive and concerning part about the report, and the part that bloggers like Michelle Malkin picked up the most is there was a line that said, these people, they could be, they could be hate groups or racist, but they also could be single issue activists who are concerned about single issue like abortion or taxes. And I think it's deeply offensive to, number one, compare those two things, or those things, as if there's any sort of correlation between defending the right to life and being a hate monger or racist. So that was offensive, and then just the notion that because somebody is passionate about the abortion issue or taxes, that they are in any way a danger to society is kind of scary.
Well, I think it would be scary if the National Right to Life Committee is getting a door knock for no good reason except that they are activists against abortion. That is completely out of bounds. That hasn't happened yet, as far as I know. So certainly, if that actually happened, I would be 100% with you. Michelle, as I don't know if you know, Michelle and I go way back.
I did not know that. Do tell.
No, Michelle was my editor in college, and we're still on good terms. But Michelle has never been one to be very protective of people of the Muslim faith when they're being profiled. So she's not on the strongest ground on this subject. But I think for the government to actually go, sniffing around, there's got to be some actual cause and not just something as fuzzy as this person has a conservative position. There has to be some sense that they're actually seriously talking about, a violent act.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sincerely hope that we never talk about this again and that this goes away. I think it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. But I'm a little bit. I mean, it's a little bit scary. It is. I mean, think of it. I mean, I don't just want to say me, but I mean, you as well. I mean, we take this for granted. I mean, the stuff that we write and do in other countries, we really could be killed. I mean, anybody who's a conservative or liberal blogger who blogs or writes about politics, you make enemies, you make big enemies. And in this country, you can go on Saturday Night Live or The Tonight Show, and that's one of the great things about this country is that you can criticize the president and get away with it. And so, but it's a little bit scary when when you sort of get this warning sign that, hey, we're keeping an eye on you. So I am very...
That's how many of us felt in the Bush years.
Well, I am very interested and very concerned and very interested in fighting tyranny and making sure that we have the right to protest and to voice our dissenting opinions, no matter how popular or unpopular they are. So, and I think
I'm more than happy the Tea Parties went without a hitch. I'm more than happy that we should be all thrilled that there's no government crackdown when there are protests against the government.
Yes, and I'm counting on you.
If the Obama administration ever crosses that line, I'll be right with you, but I do not expect it.
And if they come to get me, I want you fighting for me.
I will fight like hell for you.
All right.
I'll stand in front of the door.
Thank you.
Should we end on that note?
I think that's good, man. Good talking to you.
Same here.
And I will catch you next week.
Excellent.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Take care.